So we
Cool.
are at the official starting time.
Yes, we
Welcome,
are.
everyone, all 48 of you. So this is going to be pretty informal, but hopefully also informative for people who are interested in Nietzsche and also people who are interested in seeing behind the scenes of what it looks like for people like me and Robin to read Nietzsche's text. So one of the main reasons I'm doing this is to kind of demystify what goes into reading difficult philosophical texts. And there's a lot of people who want to read writers like Nietzsche and other authors, novelists and so on. And it can be very challenging, especially if you're doing it by yourself. So I'm really interested in this idea of doing things live, and it's worth pointing out that even for people who are highly trained in a discipline, doing a live kind of performance of their skills is quite scary. It is for me, but that's part of why I'm doing it, to show and demonstrate to people, right, that this stuff is like intimidating, but you need to develop the skill to deal with it, and you need to kind of just be honest with yourself and try to just figure it out. And it's not going to be perfect. It never is. There's no perfect reader of Nietzsche out there, right? So what we're just going to try to demonstrate here is what it's like for us to read it as a kind of role model for anyone out there who might be questioning themselves and wondering whether they're doing it right, and so on. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how it goes. I'm not sure what's going to happen. Robin has bravely volunteered to read this text with me, even though Robin has not read it in quite a long time. I've been preparing and studying Beyond Good and Evil quite a bit recently, but Robin is going to give you the sort of live reaction of someone who is very much into literature and reading literary texts. He's going to give you a live reaction from a sort of literary perspective, to Nietzsche's prose. So that'll be a really useful thing to see. Like, how does Nietzsche's prose present itself to someone like Robin, who has not read it in a long time and is coming at it from a different sort of background? I'm coming at it from the background of a academically trained philosopher. So I have um, my own limitations in that regard, right? I read Nietzsche's text very much like an academic philosopher would. So I'm also excited to see what happens when the philosopher and the kind of literary mind come together. And Nietzsche is the perfect figure for that because he's somewhere in the middle of um, philosophy and literature, and he's a great stylist. He might be the greatest philosophical stylist out there. So I just wanted to say a few words to introduce myself and Robin, and then the plan is basically this: I'm gonna uh, go over some notes I prepared about Beyond Good and Evil, and talk a bit about the book, and then we're just gonna jump into the text and see what we come up with. So, my name, for those of you who don't know, is Paul Musso. I have a PhD in philosophy. I have this Substack publication called The Micro Philosopher, which I've been working on for about a year and a half. And the goal here is, with my publication, is really to help people think for themselves philosophically. That's the simplest way to put it. The way that I'm really trying to do that is teaching people about philosophy, but also how to build their own philosophy. So that's really the unique approach that I'm adopting, making it okay and acceptable for people to view themselves as a philosopher, to think for themselves, and so on. So all of the work I'm doing here through my Substack is really in the service of that mission, to help people think for themselves. And obviously, Nietzsche is um, one of the philosophers who promotes free thinking more than any other. So that's how this fits into the big picture for me. Robin, did you want to? For those who don't know you, some of the people here might be familiar with your work already, but for those who don't, did you want to say a few things about what brought you here and some of the things you've been working on recently?
Sure. Yeah. I've just got off a call during an interview where I said that I'm kind of like the cowboy of reading literature, which is like, I take a pretty, because I was training literary criticism in university. And I think over time, I just kind of developed this outlook where literature and reading is a human right. And I just see a lot of the practices in the academy, especially around literary departments, of monopolizing interpretation and the joy of reading to the point where people are afraid of making up their own conclusions when they read a novel that's supposed to be life affirming. So that contradiction never left my brain, and I sort of, after graduating with honors, and I'm looking around around at different people, thinking to myself, okay, how can I teach what I know? And what I found there is just some amazing lessons that I try my best to package into accessible YouTube videos and workshops that I host on my newsletter called A Mug of Insights, which was on Substack before, but now we've gone independent. And so the general through line, just kind of like your work, Paul, is to encourage people to read literature and to find their own way into these amazing pools of resources to help you interpret your own feelings, interpret the human condition, and eventually start to see the world in shades of gray and be able to perceive a world that was there already. But you need literature as a stimulus for you to really open up a brand new reality to enjoy.
Great. Yeah, that's a very humanistic project in the way I'm hearing it, and that really resonates with me. It's unfortunate that formal education of the humanities can often kind of take the fun out of it and put up walls that shouldn't be there, right? So I find it
Yeah,
very liberating, through your work and through Substack and these platforms. It's very liberating to be able to help people have these richer experiences that you're describing, right? I get really
completely.
excited about that. So, all right, on that
Yeah,
note, let's get into the shades of gray by looking
let's
at
do it.
one of the grayest thinkers um, in the history of Western philosophy, Nietzsche, not just because
also,
the photos
also
of him are,
speaking of
yeah.
speaking of shades of gray, we didn't plan this for the listeners or for the people who are in the audience. We accidentally are wearing the same thing.
Yeah.
Is there like a secret society where we determine dress codes when we stream?
I hope not. I hope
Yeah,
not.
hope not.
All right. So,
Mm,
I'm gonna share my screen. Hopefully, this does not crash everything. But I've prepared some introductory remarks on Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil, which is the text we'll be reading from today. All right. Robin, can you see that?
yes.
Good. All right. So, unfortunately, I can't see the chat right now. After I say a few things, I'll stop sharing and take a look at the chat and see if there were questions. But I prepared a few remarks introducing the book, and then at the bottom here, I have the text in bold, which we'll work through, which is about 2.5 pages in the actual print. So, Beyond Good and Evil is one of Nietzsche's great books. It's one of the great books in the history of Western philosophy. According to Walter Kaufmann, who is one of the most famous translators of Nietzsche and scholars of Nietzsche, he was from Princeton University. He said it's one of the greatest. Nietzsche is one of the greatest German writers and philosophers of all time, one of the most interesting and influential Europeans of the 19th century. And Beyond Good and Evil is a perfect example of why people have said such things about Nietzsche. It's one of the most important books he's ever written. And it's very valuable for new readers to Nietzsche because it gives them a comprehensive idea of what he was about. So the reason that I'm going to be teaching this text in an upcoming course that starts next week is that it provides a great entry point to Nietzsche's thinking. It's accessible in all sorts of ways, and it touches upon all of the major themes, philosophical themes of his life's work. So it's a great place to start, and it sits right in the middle of his body of work. He published it in 1886 after publishing another famous book he wrote, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, which was his first attempt to present his entire philosophical vision. So before he wrote Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche basically was working through his ideas, kind of finding his footing as a philosopher. And in Zarathustra, he presents this bold almost complete vision or worldview, you could say, which he had been building for years. The issue was that, and if you tried to read this, you'll know, Zarathustra was a very symbolic work, very metaphorical, almost mystical, kind of religious work. And a lot of people did not really understand it. And it's not really a good place to start reading Nietzsche, even though it does present, in his own estimation, the core of his thought. So Nietzsche wrote Beyond Good and Evil with this in mind. He wrote it after Zarathustra to try to help clarify and present his ideas in a new way. He wrote to a friend in 1886, "Please read this book. Although it says the same things as Zarathustra, um, it's very different, right?" So Nietzsche published the book at his own expense, sadly. And his aim was to sell 300 copies to break even so that he could kind of keep going. Before that, his last book, Zarathustra, only sold 60 to 70 copies. Really unfortunate for Nietzsche. If only Amazon had existed at the time, right? He could have self-published on there. He complained that, his publisher was to blame, that his publisher had neglected his works and didn't promote them in bookstores. And, he was complaining about that for a while. Um, but after he published Beyond Good and Evil, he had a new publisher who did all the things he was complaining about, and he still did not sell many books. So he only sold 114 copies and gave away 66 copies. So after that publication of Beyond Good and Evil, Nietzsche wrote this to another friend: instructive, namely, one simply does not want my literature, and I may no longer afford the luxury of print. Right. So at the middle of Nietzsche's career, he's starting to question whether people even want what he has to say. Um, again, unfortunately for him, after his death in 1903, for example, he did sell quite a bit of copies of Beyond Good and Evil. 17,000 copies were in print. And this just continued to grow after his death, especially into the middle of the 20th century. And now it's, a world renowned bestseller, right? So unfortunately, in his lifetime, he did not get to see the commercial success with his works. So prior to the translation, which we will be reading from, Walter Kaufman's, two people had translated Beyond Good and Evil into English. Helen Zimmern was the first, and Helen was a English writer who actually went to meet with Nietzsche at the time he was writing it. And for a long time, this was the only translation in English that was available. In fact, this is the one that people often find on the internet for free and get stuck with and just kind of fail to read because it's written in this incredibly dense and inaccurate Victorian prose. So, if you're going for a free resource on Nietzsche, be careful with the Helen Zimmern translation. Walter Kaufman basically tried to work with Zimmern's translation when he was coming up with his own, but as in his own words, he gave up on that, right? He just started a new translation. He said the mistakes were too numerous, and in Nietzsche's case, nuances are so important that it would be difficult to say at what point an infelicitous rendering became downright wrong. Second translation was from Marianne Cowan, who was not a philosopher by training. And Kaufman thinks, this translation into English was good because it was more readable, but it was, again, full of philosophical errors of understanding, in his words. All right, so Kaufman translated Nietzsche in the 60s while he was working at Princeton. And from that point forward, Nietzsche's scholarship in the United States and in the English speaking world became much more widespread. This was a real watershed moment for Nietzsche scholarship in the English speaking world. So, this is the cover of Kaufman's translation, Beyond Good and Evil, Prelude to a Philosophy of the Future. And this one runs you about $10. And that's the copy that we'll be reading from. For those who are interested in reading other works by Nietzsche, I wanted to recommend Kaufman's book, The Portable Nietzsche, which he published in 1954. And that's a really in terms of getting bang for your buck, that's a great book to pick up because it contains his translations of the complete versions of Zarathustra, Twilight of the Idols, The Antichrist, and Nietzsche contra Wagner. So you get basically 4 books in one, and you can carry it around, hence the portable Nietzsche. Just a few concluding remarks about the book from Kaufman. He says this is one of the great books of the 19th century, indeed of any century, despite much with which the modern reader might disagree. There is much in it with which I do not agree, but that is true of all great philosophical works. There are some passages that strike me as blemishes, without which the book would be better. For example, the tedious remarks about women, which Nietzsche is famous for. Um, but Kaufman thinks, right, this is a great book, and here's why. He says, the prophetic independence of its spirit, the hundreds of doors it opens for the mind, revealing new vistas, problems, and relationships, and what it contributes to our understanding of recent thought, literature, and history. There remains another dimension. This is one of those rare books in which one encounters not only a great thinker, but also a fascinating human being of exceptional complexity and integrity. So, pretty high praise from Walter Kaufman. And I think personally, I would agree with him about everything he said. This is one of the most widely referenced books when major figures talk about their intellectual influences. Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil just keeps coming up again and again. People like Freud, Marx, all sorts of great thinkers have been deeply moved by this book. I wanted to share with you a few pictures before I stop and take a look at your questions if you have any. These are pictures of the context in which the book was written. So, the town in which it was written, Sils Maria, is shown here, which is surrounded by mountains, this sort of lush, gorgeous mountain town is a place where Nietzsche spent quite a bit of time and wrote the majority of his books here, actually in this exact house, which has been turned into a sort of Nietzsche Airbnb where you can actually rent out the very room that he stayed in if you're um, into that sort of thing and you want to be in the room of a great thinker and spend the night with his thoughts in that space, right? You can do that. I don't know if it's easy to do it, but there are YouTube videos of people making a vacation out of it. And here is the very room where he wrote Beyond Good and Evil, right? So just to get us in the context of Nietzsche's life and work, right? 1886, he wrote this book in this very simple room while dealing with incredible physical illness, right? Surrounded by natural beauty, you know, incredible mountains and fresh air, right? And he would take long hikes through the mountains, several hours, thinking to himself about his life and the history of philosophy, and then return to this room at night and write out his thoughts. So that is that is the context in which this incredible work was given birth. All right, so just stop for a few minutes, and maybe Robin, I'll start with you, and then I'll take a look at the chat. Um, I'm curious if there was any reactions or questions you had based on any of the notes I just shared while I look over into the audience. Yeah.
Sure, yeah. I'm just first off, your lecturing style was so engaging. For that whole time, I feel like my attention's just fixed on what you were saying, and then it reminds me of like I don't know which YouTube video it is. Like to learn something, you want to feel as if you're being taken on a journey, and I feel like from that opening to like how you situated Nietzsche in that room in the Alps, and now I'm like so excited to get started to
Good.
parse the text. Yeah. Also, I'm wondering if you've read. His name is John Kaag, isn't it? Kaag. He
Mm.
wrote something called Hiking with Nietzsche. I'm wondering if it's the same cabin because he secured like a scholarship to head up there to live in that room, and he hiked the same mountains, and he nearly died, I think,
Oh,
hiking
wow.
once. Yeah, and then no, that book is it's quite interesting, but there are criticisms about his way of reading Nietzsche, or like taking an overtly kind of biographical and romantic reading of his work. So, do you think,
Mm.
from your experience with Nietzsche, is there a danger to read too much into the romances of his life, and or is this biography inherently linked with his work?
Good. Yeah, that's a great question. First off, like when it comes to interpreting Nietzsche, people get very upset very easily.
Yeah.
He has, for some reason, and my guess is that it's because he's hard to pin down. People get very attached to different readings of him, and are very likely to accuse others of misunderstanding him, and so on. Right. So, you know, you're almost damned if you do, no matter what. If you take any kind of stance on Nietzsche, someone is going to push back on it. But that's why he's a great thinker, right? He forces us to ask these questions. Regarding his biography, Kaufman talks a lot about this in his own biography, Nietzsche. It's titled Nietzsche, Philosopher, Psychologist, Antichrist, which is actually one of the first philosophy books I ever read that got me interested in philosophy. Some people go way too far with the biographical kind of reading of him. He is a philosopher. He is putting forward ideas which kind of can transcend him as a person, right? So, um, there are ideas in his work that obviously emerge from the circumstances of his life and are influenced by that for sure. But that's not to say that they're sort of merely his kind of opinions, his kind of personal takes on things, right? He is building a philosophy that is serious and that is meant to go beyond his own kind of personal biases and prejudices, right? The problem and the kind of we're fortunate to have so many of his personal notes, and we're fortunate to have so much information about him as a person, right? It helps us understand him, but the way people use that information can lead them to kind of read too much into his personal life, right? Sometimes that information is useful and gives you the depth behind the ideas and you could see the progression. Other times, people will take the kind of permanent philosophy and just reduce it to like, these biographical opinions or something. And, that's a big methodological dispute in philosophy. Some people think philosophers should not pay attention at all to the biography. Um, Others think that it's necessary. Personally, I think you do need to understand the history and context behind ideas, but that's has a lot to do with the way I think about philosophy. So,
Mm.
yeah, you've touched on a really big debate in Nietzsche scholarship. Um,
Uh-oh.
yeah, but
Uh-oh.
especially with regard to his views on women, that's a huge topic in Nietzsche scholarship, right? People read very much into his relationships or lack thereof, and how those influence his views on women and so on. Um, Good. So let me see if there was any. I don't see any questions right now in the chat. So maybe
I'm
we
just
should.
trying to There's someone who asked about audio. Maybe we should check in with the audience. If the audio is okay, I think one of them's having a bit of trouble getting the audio to work. I
Okay.
think for most people, it's fine.
Yeah. There might. I don't know what it looks like on the other end. If there's like an unmute button or something.
Yeah. No, I
Yeah.
think if it's Bill Mathis. I think he's got it sorted out.
Okay. Good.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Beautiful. Yeah, it's
Thank
fixed.
you. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So on the topic of women, um, let's look at the way Nietzsche begins Beyond Good and Evil with this puzzling and controversial, potentially controversial statement. Let me just
Mm.
pull it up here. We'll see. So, Robin, are you able to see the chat while I'm sharing screen?
I'm able to see it.
Okay.
Um, yeah, I
So
think sometimes when you're in presentation mode, it blocks everything out of your view, so that's why.
okay,
And
so if you
if
wanted
there's a
to
question, yeah.
yeah, if you could look at the chat while we're doing this, that'd be really
Sure.
helpful.
Mhm.
Alright, so let's look. I actually wanted to mention that I have the physical book with me, but I typed out the text, and that was an interesting experience in terms of how slowly one should read. It took me about 20 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes to type out these 3 pages. And I was thinking, in terms of how to read philosophy, the pace at which you can type it out is often the pace at which I think you should read philosophy, which is quite slow. So I just wanted to mention that that was an interesting kind of experience typing it out every word, on my keyboard and thinking about how that affected the way I was reading it as I was typing. All right, so here is the text. Um, Now we start with this very provocative line from Nietzsche. Supposing truth is a woman, what then? Right? Supposing truth is a woman, what then? This line has been written about many times. It deserves a lot of thought and commentary. I'm curious, Robin, as someone who's looking at this fresh, you open this book, you go to the bookstore, you buy this philosophy book, you're excited to read it, and this is the first line. How does that strike you?
It's provocative to start with, but I'm not sure if part of my brain is just, like, very, very much English literature kinda primed. The dash that's in there,
Yep.
I'm wondering if this is, if the dash is added in an addition, or did it appear in a original German text? Because, some of some of Emily Dickinson's texts, the placement of dashes tend to change the entire meaning. And then I'm just wondering, like the function of that dash. I don't wanna, like, get too much into the kinda, like, the little symbols of it all, but it is a very provocative statement that definitely wants me, uh it's keeping
Yeah.
my interest, yeah.
So the dash is worth I mean, this is great. This is exactly what I wanted because the way
Mm.
you see this is you're going down to the micro details of
Yeah,
the writing immediately, right?
yeah.
Um, so the dashes are in the introduction, Kaufman mentions that the dash is actually his um, presentation of Nietzsche's use of an ellipsis. So
Mm,
Nietzsche often would, in all of his writings, put like 3 or 4 dots to put some kind of like break, right? And Kaufman just made a decision as the editor translator to put a dash instead of dots because he thought it would be misleading to put the ellipsis.
mm.
Um, anyways, so how do you think the dash affects the meaning of this sentence, right? Supposing truth is a woman, what then, right?
It's either a pause or there's a comment that I really like from the chat. Alex Anders,
Mhm.
um, he said dash equals invitation to pause and think for yourself before proceeding.
Mm.
If we look at the second dash, so what is certain is that she has not allowed herself to be won. And today, even every kind of dogmatism is left standing dispirited and discouraged. I think it does serve as a nice, it breaks up the flow of the text, and I think it does function as an ellipsis.
Mhm.
So, like whenever you see three dots, it's either like, okay, time to pause, or he's simply no. I'm wondering if it's the same for the second one today. He tends to leave it before he makes one of these really where it's either an invitation to think, or he places a dash before he drops a bomb. And today, every
Yep.
kind of dogmatism is left standing dispirited and
Yep.
discouraged. Yeah.
Yeah.
So is that along the lines of like I want to get your philosophical take on this?
So first thing to say is like obviously Nietzsche writes very differently than most philosophers, right? Um, the use of these dashes, the rhetorical questions, and so on, right? This is not how most philosophy texts begin, especially German philosophy in this time period, right? What you would normally expect from a philosopher is a kind of treatise and the style in which you would write a treatise. In this work, I will argue that blah blah blah, right?
Mm,
But here we get, I think it was Alex you said is right. We get an invitation to think for ourselves right in the first line, right? Pause, like literally stop and like consider this provocative statement. Supposing truth is a woman. I think if you were to present that to anyone, whether they're a philosopher or not, and ask them that question, I think people would have all sorts of different things to say, right? They would be like, "What do you mean? Like, what does it mean for truth to be a woman? What is the nature of women? Is he, is this guy a misogynist? Is this guy a," right? So, philosophically, I think it is an invitation to think for yourself and to consider a strange way of talking about truth, right? A strange way of talking about truth. Typically, truth is talked about by philosophers as something very abstract, something very lifeless almost, right? The kind of cosmic perspective of objective reality. So he's making it humanized, right? It's a woman. What would be the consequences of that? And that you're right that the dashes often for Nietzsche, like he'll introduce an idea and then maybe pivot or drop a bomb right after the dashes.
mhm.
All right, let's move on a bit. All right, so yeah, what then? What happens if truth is a woman? What does Nietzsche think? He asks another question: are there not grounds for the suspicion that all philosophers, right, all philosophers, insofar as they were dogmatists, right? So all philosophers who were dogmatists have been very inexpert about women.
Hmm.
So let's think about, I think it's important to pause here and think about how
Mm.
that sentence connects to the first one, right? Like, again, you might just read this like, why is he talking about women, right? What is he on about? So, Robin, I'm curious what you're reading the second sentence to mean in relation to the first one.
So 2 things. One is, I'm not too into the I'm not too familiar with the distinction between dogmatism and other forms of, like, philosophical thinking. I think when Nietzsche says dogmatists, he's referring to a very specific strand of philosophy, and a lot of it, it's like from my very limited understanding is, a lot of refutation of Kant's metaphysics or just, like, very fixed views of, it's like I from my understanding, he's certainly refuting a group of people called dogmatists. So I
Yep.
just wanna, like, deepen that definition right there, just
Good.
highlighted. And, also the second one is, no grounds for suspicions of having very an expert about women. This reminds me of something, of a interview with, Jacques Derrida, where he's basically asked, like, "What do you think is missing from certain biographies of philosophers?" He's like, why is no one documenting the intimacies between, I mean, the intimate lives of philosophers? Like, you would never think of, someone writing a whole history about Hegel's love life or Heidegger's love life. So why is this such a missing piece of philosophical history if love is such a grave concern in philosophy? So
Good.
that's the
Uh,
second thing. Yeah.
yeah, good. So let's go first with the dogmatism
Mm,
thing. So yeah, I wanted to point out that I'm glad you paused here because this is the first word that might be confusing for people, right? All the words up to this point are familiar, but then we get what seems like a technical term, right? So it's good to, when reading, bold or underline those words that you're not sure about. And, this one, is it referring to a theory? Like, is dogmatism a philosophical theory? Is it a school of philosophy and so on? Basically, Nietzsche is using it here in the way you suggested, as a kind of pejorative term, right? Dogmatists are people who Nietzsche thinks are closed-minded, they're rigid thinkers, and they are people who, because of their kind of rigidness, have done a poor job having a relationship to women, i.e., truth. Right? If truth
Mm,
was a woman and you were trying to win truth over, you were trying to win the woman's heart, and you were this sort of stuffy academic philosopher who has no, you know, no game, no romantic skills, etc., you're gonna fumble and you're gonna stumble on yourself, right? So I think what he's doing here is mocking philosophers for trying to like treat truth as something which is kind of lifeless and cold and rigid
mhm,
and analytical even, when really truth might require, if we suppose it's a woman, it might require a more w- we could say heartfelt approach or something. It might require a more romantic or delicate or even potentially playful approach. So a
mhm,
big theme in Nietzsche's philosophy is to break out of traditional, kind of systematic thinking and open up new ground for philosophical creativity. All right, and truth might require that if it's something like a woman. That's part of what he's suggesting here. The other question I think is a huge question. Right, I'm not sure. Maybe I'll just put a pin in that one so we can make some more progress.
yeah. We can stay here for 2 more hours.
Yeah. Well,
The
that's
first sentence.
there's actually a video, I saw yesterday of Jordan Peterson. It's titled, "Spending 45 minutes on one page of Nietzsche" or something.
I mean, the stream is already 40 minutes, so we got time.
Alright, let's pick it up. Um,
Mm,
alright, let's move on here. So, I'm just gonna read the next couple sentences. "That the gruesome seriousness,
mm,
the clumsy obtrusiveness with which they have usually approached truth," the dogmatist, "so far have been awkward and very improper methods for winning a woman's heart. What
mhm,
is certain, so we have something certain here, Nietzsche is putting forward a claim, is that she has not allowed herself to be won." Interesting. "And today, every kind of dogmatist is left standing, dispirited and discouraged, if it is left standing at all. For there are scoffers who claim that it has fallen, that all dogmatism lies on the ground. Even more, that all dogmatism is dying."
mm.
So this idea, I'm curious what you think about it, Robin, that truth has not allowed herself to be won is interesting. It's giving a kind of agency to truth.
Oh, absolutely. No, I actually love this line so much because it directly touches on I don't know how familiar you are with like philosophy of the late 80s of from a philosopher called Alain Badiou.
Mhm.
He
I'm not
basically had
terribly
this.
familiar, but yeah.
Yeah, so he's huge in literary theory where he's a philosopher and he uses a lot of analytic philosophy methods, but then what he eventually concluded from I don't know how he reasoned to this point. He incorporated a Cantor set theory into it somehow, but the condition for truth is actually you cannot access it directly, but the condition to truth is actually you need to create a two scene, which means let's just take love for example. Like suppose truth is a woman. The way that you actually win someone over is not by trying to possess them completely, which is your will
Mhm,
possessing the other person. That is a process of subtracting the other person's uniqueness because you're trying to find a carbon copy of yourself in the other person. So
mm,
that's kind of like you know, that's in a sense you trying to find repetitions of yourself in the other person. So that's kind of dogmatic in its own way. And if we suppose that this romantic subject is a book,
mhm,
and we can simply reason that when we read a book, if we try to really get to the truth of the book or really get to the core of what the book is about, we're in a sense just looking to confirm our own standing beliefs and whatever philosophical systems that we have in our head. So it becomes confirmation bias, whereas real truth is you need to love the subject enough, and it's not an object, it's a subject. You need to love the subject so much so that you let yourself possess their world completely. You see the world completely anew from their perspective. And then truth from this case is viewed from two vantage points. Your perspective merged with their perspective. And it's not even about getting or completely knowing the other subject, but it's about viewing a completely different world from the vantage point of the two. So that's kind of
Yeah.
what it brings up for me.
Wow,
And
that's amazing.
yeah.
I'm so glad you brought that up because actually in the first book of Beyond Good and Evil, there's a
Mm,
I think it's the very first section, and this connects to the biography point. Nietzsche argues that these dogmatists and these kind of traditional philosophers, they think they are presenting objective truth, but what they're
mm,
really doing is justifying their own, like, personal beliefs and culture, and
mm.
under the guise of presenting this objective image of truth without realizing that they're just, like you said, kind of giving an interpretation of themselves. So they're not actually even kind of approaching the woman at all. They're almost like constructing an idea of what the woman is before even talking to her and like engaging with her, right?
Mm.
This theme also in Plato, in the Symposium is really big. This idea of love as possession and what it means to win someone through dialogue, right?
Mm.
And flirtatiousness and how that connects with um, seeing another and kind of understanding another person and using this dialogical process to construct an interpretation of another and also to win them over in some sense.
Yeah, and then even just been thinking about this a lot because I feel like most of my better ideas don't come from just me claiming credit, thinking alone in front of a fireplace. No, they came out of dialogue. And supposed truth is something that can only be reached through, the scene of two. So when two people are kind of talking about a subject that they both love, I think that shared love does open up like a third perspective where this perspective is only accessible with two people thinking about it at the same time. Otherwise, we're so prone to just bring our own biases into it without even realizing that we're biased.
Yeah, I mean that's why we're here, right? This is
Yep,
already
exactly.
it's already been
Practicing
fruitful.
practicing Nietzschean philosophy.
All right, let's maybe move on to the next paragraph. So
Sure.
he says, speaking seriously, there are good reasons why all philosophical dogmatizing, however solemn and definitive its airs used to be, may nevertheless have been no more than a noble childishness and tyrannism. So I actually had to look this word up.
Mm.
Have you seen this word before?
I haven't.
Yeah. So it basically
Tyrannus.
comes from a Latin word for like beginner or novice.
Mm.
So, this is interesting because he's saying there are good reasons why we should view most of the history of philosophy as just the beginning, a kind of childish attempt at truth. And this is obviously connected to the subtitle of the work, which is a prelude to a philosophy of the future. So Nietzsche is introducing this idea that philosophy may have just kind of gotten started and fumbled it over itself, even though people think it's been this kind of noble, grand discipline. Right. So it's a pretty interesting take on the history of philosophy that he's starting to bring up here. And that's going to be a big theme in the work as a whole. Right. The way in which the future of philosophy might be very different from the past. And then it's going to require us to think differently, to live differently, to question differently, and so on. And obviously beyond good and evil, the title going beyond the normal moral categories which we've used to judge each other and so on is kind of a scary thing. It's something that seems not for us. It seems like maybe something for the future humans. All right, so let's move on a bit. And perhaps the time is at hand. So now time is being introduced, right? When it will be comprehended again and again how little used to be sufficient to furnish the cornerstone for such sublime and unconditional philosophers' edifices as the dogmatists have built so far. This was pretty hard for me.
Mm,
Let's maybe take a second, see if we
sure.
can figure it out. Let me highlight it. Perhaps the time is at hand when it will be comprehended again and again how little used to be sufficient to furnish the cornerstone for what? For such sublime and unconditional philosophers' edifices as the dogmatists have built so far.
Mm. I think edifice might be the hinge point here. I'm not like I need to like formally define this word. And
Well, the
yeah.
unconditional philosopher's edifices most likely means,
Mm,
um, like these kind of grand metaphysical structures that philosophers have built. These, unconditional meaning, like, you could think objective, like they're trying to build these objective views of the world that are absolutely true, right?
yeah, because if we're allowed to just deviate for the text, like I remembered from years ago when I first read this book, there was a whole paragraph about people going out there to hunt for going out there in the woods hunting for like Kant's kind of, you know, metaphysical structures without finding anything.
Mhm.
So coming back to this one, like, is there already a theme appearing here about critiquing past grand structures that are being built?
Yeah, it's definitely.
Mm. How
I
little
think
used
he's I think Nietzsche is skeptical about them for sure, but I guess what I'm puzzled about is
Mm,
what does he mean by saying that we will comprehend how little used to be sufficient? So how little was needed
mhm.
to furnish the cornerstone for these? Like why is that a significant thing to comprehend? Maybe we should maybe do you think the next sentence or two would help?
Yeah, because that's a semicolon there, so
Right.
it's a
Yep.
continuation, yeah.
All right, so we're seeing
Mm.
some of the challenges here of reading Nietzsche. Any old
Yeah.
popular any old popular superstition from time immemorial, like the soul superstition, which in the form of the subject and ego superstition, has not even yet ceased to do mischief.
Oof.
All right, so the soul superstition, he's thinking here of Plato and like
Mm.
um, maybe even Descartes, people
Yeah,
who,
I was thinking
yeah.
Descartes and, because Descartes essentially just single-handedly founded modern philosophy and set down, like, one of the rules for a lot of systems to come. So in the form of I just have a question. So subject and the ego superstition, do you know precisely what he's referring to? Is that like a philosophical concept? Subject and ego.
So the superstition that there is a subject is,
Mm,
yeah, basically this belief. Nietzsche doesn't really think there's a self in the traditional sense.
mm,
So, people like Plato believed that there was a soul,
mm,
and a kind of seat of consciousness that was singular. And Descartes, basically treated the
mm,
subject as, yeah, like the ego and subject, I guess, are the same here. The seat of consciousness, the thing which makes you the kind of stable entity which, from the point of view from which you interpret reality and so on.
mm.
I think I understand the sentence now.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I think all he's saying is perhaps the time is at hand when we will comprehend basically how little these philosophers needed to build these grand systems. Like they would just take
Mm,
one prejudice one superstition and build a whole worldview out of it. So the first chapter of Beyond Good and Evil is called The Prejudices of the Philosophers, and it's
Mm,
all about this stuff. Um, it's all about how people like Kant and Plato and Descartes, etc., they would just kind of have one idea as a sort of foundation, and they could build like this whole edifice on top of it. But of course, if the foundation of your cathedral is a superstition, then it can easily be destroyed, right?
mm,
So I think, that'll also make sense with this next clause. Some play on words, perhaps, a seduction by grammar, or an audacious generalization of very narrow, very personal, very human, all too human facts.
mm,
So these superstitions, I think he's suggesting, could be the byproduct of misunderstanding language or grammar,
mm.
leading us to think that something like the subject is real because there's a subject in a sentence. So if we can talk about the subject, then there is a subject, something like that. How does that make sense?
That does make sense, yeah. I just wanna give credit to Alex again. He wrote a very nice kinda summary of, like, basically a whole paragraph that we, struggle to figure out. Dogmatic equals analytic philosophers, equals those unconditional philosophers. So those who believing absolutes, which are from the past, which have never, seduced or seduced truth. Absolutes are so small because they are conceived of as fixed. So there's kind of like a small and fixed quality where people will pick the first certain thing they know without investigating it much and build a whole system out of it. And
Yep.
yeah,
Yeah, that's helpful for sure to think of it as
mm,
a kind of like axiom or something, right?
yeah,
But what's interesting about Nietzsche is that he would suggest that these philosophers aren't even aware. They're not always aware that they are building on top of something which is a human, all too human fact, a kind of maybe a cultural superstition or um, a bias, right? They think it's an objective thing they're building on, like some view of the soul. But
mm,
really, it's a sort of byproduct of the context in which they're thinking. So it's interesting whether they're doing that explicitly. Some philosophers have done it explicitly, right? They're trying to
mm.
find the foundation of metaphysics or something. But
Cogito ergo
right,
sum. Yeah.
right, exactly. But other
Mm,
philosophers, Nietzsche is going to argue, smuggle in assumptions, thinking that they're being objective without realizing how they're determined by their kind of history and context,
mm.
or they're seduced by grammar. Wittgenstein in the 20th century is going to make a big fuss about how all
Yeah.
philosophical problems are the problems of language and grammar misleading us, right?
Yeah, and then I love that story of how after he wrote the Tractatus, he's like, "I've solved all problems of philosophy," and then
Yep.
just disappeared.
All right. How are we doing on time? We're at like an hour, I'm
Yeah,
guessing. Oh wow.
yeah.
All right, let's see how far we can get. We might need to skip a few because there's some important stuff at the end I definitely want to touch
Mm,
on. He says the dogmatist philosophy was, let us hope, only a promise across millennia, as astrology was in still earlier times, when perhaps more work, money, acuteness, and patience were lavished in its service than for any real science so far.
mm,
To astrology and its supra-terrestrial claims, we owe the grand style of architecture in Asia and Egypt. It seems that all great things first have to bestride the earth in monstrous and frightening masks in order to inscribe themselves in the hearts of humanity with eternal demands. Oops, deleted that.
what
Dogmatic philosophy was such a mask. For example, the Vedanta doctrine in Asia, in Hindu philosophy, and Platonism in
mm,
Europe. Really interesting. So this paragraph I feel a lot better about. I'm
mm.
not sure if you agree, but
Yeah, I agree.
yeah. Um, so he's saying something interesting here, and it's based on this theme of philosophy kind of just getting started, right? Maybe dogmatic philosophy was like astrology, which,
Mm,
you know, has been proven false, you might say, but people took it very seriously, and there were good things which came out of it, like certain innovations in architecture and really interesting structures that were based on astrological beliefs and so on. So Nietzsche's hypothesis here is maybe dogmatic philosophy like had to come about in order for us to kind of move beyond it, right?
mm. Vedanta doctrine, Asia, Platonism in Europe.
Yeah, and Platonism is going to be he's going to
Mm,
just dig into Platonism. He doesn't say anything else about Vedanta, but
yeah.
um it's this idea, this sentence here is the key for me in this paragraph. Like
Mm,
all great things have to bestride the earth. Like you could, for Nietzsche, Christianity, they have to sort of have their day, and it might last hundreds of years. Their sort of influence. They have to bestride the earth in these masks in order to inscribe themselves in the hearts of humanity, right? So
mm.
I don't know how you're reading that, but yeah, curious what your take is on that.
I love how, like, astrology and I mean, now people can sort of I mean, I have friends as hard as my like, it's hard to believe that I still have friends who, like, believe in astrology and they take it very seriously, despite knowing that that thing has no scientific basis whatsoever. And, so I'm kind of interpreting as I go here. Donna doctrine. It still feels like a extension of the last part, but over here, he's sort of drawing on history. Like this part is very much like if we read it argumentatively, this is the part where he introduces evidence, whereas
Yep.
he dropped a kind of bomb beforehand. And then this is very much an example of introducing such an example of like how such a small thing, like for example, this belief in astrology can be taken as such an absolute that are given such huge structures, and
Yeah.
that kind of antithesis between minute thing, biases, and then childishness could even, even such a mistake or a misconception about how the universe works could give, all architecture in Asia and Egypt. I don't know how true that is,
Yeah.
but
Me
it
neither.
just seems like these two paragraphs, one is like going in, which is like there are these things that are birthed out of really minute, all too human facts. And then now over here, he's kind of zooming out. He's like, even though things could be built out of erroneous ideas, however small, they still were maintained over time and given large structures. And he's, to me, he's kind of saying like, don't take grand structures for granted because you don't know how minute the origin was.
Yes. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
great. Um, and you might have to do a lot of work to figure out like
Mm,
what really led to this massive movement, right? Was it like what was the sort of the Big Bang or
mm,
the atomic moment that like caused some tradition to take over the earth or to sweep across different cultures and so on? Was it a single idea? Was it a single superstition? Right? It could be anything. It seems like
mm,
this next paragraph will add some interesting layers to that. He says, "Let us not be ungrateful to it." Right. So he does, like you said, he wants us to kind of appreciate,
mm,
um, respect this, although it must certainly be conceded that the worst, most durable, and most dangerous of all errors so far was a dogmatist error, namely Plato's invention of the pure spirit and the good. So let us not be ungrateful, right? Let us not be ungrateful to astrology, to dogmatism, but, right, the worst, most durable, most dangerous error was coming from a dogmatist like Plato,
mm.
um, inventing the idea of the pure spirit. I'm guessing just the soul here, the pure soul and that he was talking about earlier, and
mm,
the good as such. Plato had this famous idea that all of reality was built upon what he called the form of goodness. So
mm.
he believed that the good was objectively real, and it was the sort of fundamental ground of all reality.
So there's almost like a that yeah, hits that theory of the ideal form, isn't it? And then in fact, most of what we do nowadays, there has to be some sort of a frame for why we do it. And I feel like all of us, we have unconscious ideal forms in our lives. It's like, why are we doing anything? It's like, where is that standard of morality? So, for example, you face a really difficult, like, I don't know, the trolley problem, for example. Like, what is the reference point, like the fixed reference point that we're looking to resolve these questions? But
Yeah.
more often than not, um, just like the trolley problem, first year philosophy classes, you spend so long trying to come up with a solution. So I think what he's trying to say here is that a dogmatist would point to a fixed kind of, that's my solution and that's how I'm going to defend it. But he's more viewing this whole thing as a dangerous exercise, because if you have such a fixed point, that means you're not looking at the origin of that fixed point close enough.
Yep.
Yeah.
And Nietzsche's view of nature and the world is very much not chaos,
Mm,
but it's dynamic. It cannot be pinned down, right? Life is dynamic and it's a kind of creative force. His big idea of the will to power is really like what drives life is change and growth, and right, these sort of things cannot be reduced to these like static, almost architectural theories, right?
mm,
And also thinking back to the truth as a woman, right? If truth is like a woman, you might think that truth is, well, first of all, it's a living, breathing person, right? It
mm,
has feelings and it has desires, right? Typically people don't think about truth as something which might have this sort of fluidity or um chaotic nature of the emotions. They think of truth as something which is almost lifeless, right?
mm,
So I think the dogmatist error is to try, Plato in particular, is to try to pin down and to try to fix things to some kind of absolute, or um, to fix things to a system, or place them into categories and so on, and reduce them to a foundation. All right, so let's a few more interesting lines in this paragraph that start to give us a sense of what Nietzsche is proposing. He says, "But not that it is overcome, now that Europe is breathing freely again." Oh, sorry. Europe is breathing freely again after this nightmare, and at least can enjoy a healthier, I don't know why there's a dash here, sleep. We whose task is wakefulness itself. We whose task is wakefulness itself are the heirs of all that strength which has been fostered by the fight against this error. So it has not been overcome, right?
mm,
But Europe is now, he thinks, and this is a huge theme in Nietzsche, he thinks that he is reporting to us an important moment in the history of ideas, that Europe is able to breathe freely again after the old dogmatic philosophers have died off and so on. And there is a we here. We, he's referring now to an audience of people that he thinks have a task, right? Which is
mm,
wakefulness itself. And we are the heirs of all that strength which has been fostered by the fight against this error.
mm.
So yeah, I mean the key thing is like what is this task, right? Sorry, go ahead, Robin.
Also, namely, what is the era? Because in an earlier part of the sentence, he said, conceited most durable and most dangerous of all eras.
Oh, so it's
I
Plato's
mean,
error.
yeah,
Plato's
Plato's era. Yeah. I think I'm reading into that namely. which is like it could be used to introduce like, for example, here's
Yep.
one of the errors, but he's more talking about a overall error of dogmatism.
So
Yeah.
he says Plato's error is the most durable, dangerous of all
Yep.
errors.
Mm,
And basically, looking ahead a bit, the reason he thinks that is because Platonism for him is the metaphysics of Christianity.
yeah, okay.
Plato, by establishing Plato's metaphysics, Plato, by establishing these kind of dogmatic beliefs, has given Christianity this massive influence over the history of Western Europe and Western philosophy.
Mm,
So he's blaming Plato for that. And people are starting to wake up to this and start to think differently and question those assumptions, right? And he thinks we can kind of leverage the strength of those who have been fighting against it and maybe
mm,
take that kinetic energy and put it towards a new kind of philosophy.
mm. Yeah, that's huge. Yeah, because I think before there's before this kind of, before this I mean, during this kinda like, where did he say it before? During this kinda nightmare that Nietzsche talked about, like,
Yeah.
every philosopher within every philosopher's work, there's some kind of reference to the theological system. Like, Aquinas is huge, and then maybe after that, even Descartes, like, and one
Yep.
of the comments before reminded me of Descartes, basically had to introduce a whole proof about God. And then some people when they're reading to that proof about God, like basically, Descartes' whole system falls apart because God is just shoved in the system right away. And then, yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I think Nietzsche's interest is
Mm,
um, even deeper than it's not just to show that people were wrong. He's
mm,
actually more interested in the way in which these assumptions limit human potential for thinking new thoughts, right?
mm,
The fact that Descartes was a byproduct of Catholic France
mm,
is what led him to ask certain philosophical questions and led him to certain philosophical results. And Nietzsche wants to break out of that and create the conditions. And also, this work, Beyond Good and Evil, is meant to kind of inspire and educate a kind of new, more free way of thinking about morality in particular, but also
mm,
philosophy in general.
mm,
The next line is interesting because it adds some depth to like what the error involves. He says it to be sure. So this error, to be sure, it
mm.
meant standing truth on her head. So taking the woman and turning her upside down. Poor woman.
Oh, no.
Um, Standing truth on her head and denying perspective, the basic condition of all life. Right. So this is a huge Nietzschean idea now. He's saying they've gotten it upside down, right?
Mm,
They've tried to eliminate perspectivity and you could say roughly like subjectivity or point of view or something,
mm,
which is the basic condition of all life. So if their goal is to give us like a true theory of reality and life is part of that, they have tried to basically eliminate life from truth because they're denying perspective.
mm,
So why does the error deny perspective? Because what Plato was trying to develop was a theory of what is real from sort of no perspective at all, from like the perspective of the universe or something.
mm,
But Nietzsche is thinking of truth, especially in his other works. He thinks of truth and philosophy as very much perspectival, right? Something which
mm,
is necessarily bound to a perspective, a context, a psychology, a body, right? So then he says a few lines down, we can even ask like a physician now. We're thinking of, this is a pretty strange thing for a philosopher to say.
Mm.
Take on the role of a physician. So he's going to give a kind of medical diagnosis of Plato.
Mm.
And this I love. This is one of my favorite parts. Um, he says, "How could the most beautiful growth of antiquity, Plato, contract such a disease? Did the wicked Socrates corrupt him after all?" Right. So, for those who don't know, Socrates was sentenced to death for corrupting on charges of corrupting the youth, and Plato was
Mm.
Socrates' student. So Nietzsche's entertaining the idea that maybe Socrates was the source of this kind of superstition about the soul
Mm.
and gave Plato this disease. So maybe Socrates deserved to die, right? Maybe he was guilty of corrupting Plato, who himself, he calls him here a beautiful growth of antiquity. Why does he praise Plato at the same time as criticizing him? Because Plato was a great stylist.
Yeah, I was about to add to that. This kind of really hits at the style of Nietzsche's writing, which I think is one of the most unique forms of communicating philosophy, because there's definitely a poetic quality, especially Thus Spoke Zarathustra, which I still haven't finished because it's so like prosy. I feel like every third word there's an illusion that's escaping me.
Yep.
Um, and I feel like to struggle with texts that are kind of supposed to hit you, or even to form aphorism. I mean, there's a lot of the French moralists are really good at this, where they would write, they would distill truths in a paradox, in a paradoxical sentence, where where, for example, what is it? We can all bear, we can all it's like I can't produce the exact quote, but
Mhm.
La Rochefoucauld basically, he had a sentence where we can all afford to bear the misfortunes of others. So the sentence itself has a truthful ring to it, but it's packed full of paradox.
Yeah.
And I imagine a lot of Beyond Good and Evil's aphorisms also carry the same quality, which is
Yep.
you cannot have such an objective truth that's not like open to dispute. Whereas if you paradoxically have a form of writing or a form of argumentation that is itself not conducive to truth, for example, a paradox, it could, paradoxically serve the same function as getting to truth.
Yeah, so it depends what truth is like, right? Nietzsche
Yeah.
thinks, yes, we need to in order for us to get at the truth, we need to have a more kind of paradoxical, delicate, nuanced way of thinking, right?
Mm.
And that's very hard for people, especially when they read other philosophy, because Nietzsche will, in the same sentence, praise someone he's criticizing, right? And
Yeah.
that's just
True. Yeah.
like, and it's very, it's very challenging and it's very revealing for the reader to
Mm.
recognize how we are so tempted to think about things and reduce them to something that is one dimensional.
Mm.
And Nietzsche is constantly challenging us to have this gray, nuanced, complex take on everything, right?
Mm.
And not just try to find, oh, what's his conclusion? What does he think about Plato? Oh, Nietzsche doesn't like Plato. Therefore, I understand Nietzsche, right? It is not that simple. I think this is a good example of that, right?
Mm.
Plato is the most beautiful growth of antiquity. That's a gigantic statement.
Yeah.
Like antiquity is hundreds of years of culture. He's saying
Mm.
Plato is the most beautiful outgrowth of that. And he had a disease, like
Yeah. Diseased by truth itself, or
right.
like the dogmatic version of truth itself.
So, the next sentence,
Uh,
connects this to Christianity now, which is
mm.
interesting. He says, "The fight
Mm.
against Plato, or to speak more clearly and for the people, the fight against the Christian, uh, ecclesiastical pressure of millennia For Christianity is Platonism for the people. This sounds like Marx here. Like
Mm.
religion is opiate for the mass. Christianity is Platonism for the people, has created in Europe a magnificent tension of the spirit, the likes of which have never yet existed on earth. So,
Mm.
just to preview a bit of the rest of this, Nietzsche's going to start talking about this tension in the historical moment in which he's writing, which he thinks is the result of people kind of fighting against this dogmatism. And there's this
Mm.
opportunity now to almost break free from this. He's going to say later that it's like a tension in a bow, that like the arrow is drawn, the bow is drawn, and we have the ability to shoot this arrow philosophically to distant goals and new kind of regions of thought, right?
Mm.
So he's grateful, going back to that gratitude towards astrology, towards dogmatism. Nietzsche's grateful because he has this idea that out of false traditions, right, there's this kind of kinetic energy which can be used to kind of leap over them to something greater, right?
Mm.
So here, the fight against Plato, which is the same fight as the fight against Christianity or the kind of philosophy of the masses, he's thinking, has created this tension of the European spirit, which is greater than anything which has existed before, right? And now we can shoot this bow for the most distant goals.
Mm. Twice already. Yeah, I'm just kind of reading ahead here. I had a question, which is how is this connected to like the first round of the European Enlightenment, where there was this shaking, you know, breaking apart of structures, post French Revolution.
Yeah. So, I mean, a bit later, he's going to criticize democratic thinking.
Yep.
So, I mean, he does really favor some Enlightenment figures,
Mm.
but there are also ideals of the Enlightenment, like certain kinds of democratic values, which Nietzsche is pretty critical of.
Mm.
So, the Enlightenment is, it depends, I guess, what we're talking about specifically, but um, it's part of this story for sure. It's part of what
Mm.
led to the moment in which he's writing. But then the question is, what are we going to do with that tension, with that bow? Where are we going to aim it
Mm.
at? And he thinks that, where is it? People are attempting to unbend it, like the Jesuits and Democrats.
Mm.
Democratic enlightenment. Here he says it here.
Mm.
Right. So his idea is that, and he's this is pretty funny. Complaining about newspapers, and
Ah,
freedom of
yeah.
press. Right. He says that the democratic enlightenment is trying to unbend the bow and reduce the tension with the aid of the freedom of the press and newspaper reading.
Mm.
So why
I
does he think that? Let's see.
I think there's a connection in there somewhere with the former with the paragraphs that we've read before, which is dogmatism is so easy to adopt because it converges perfectly with one's all too human preferences and opinions. And then this brings to mind there's a dictionary called by Gustave Flaubert called
Mhm.
in French they call it une encyclopédie de la bêtise humaine, which is a encyclopedia of human stupidity. And this whole dictionary is just full of like things that sound true but are not factually true. For example, like the idea of a Frenchman is someone who stares up at the monuments or something. Like there are all these like bogus claims sourced from newspapers. So I think one of the things that philosophers never fail to criticize is the circulation of mass media. It's
Yep.
like, is there a process to wrestle with truth that's fundamentally isolated from the very form of mass consumption? It's like that's what it brought to mind because there's Walter Benjamin criticized, digital reproduction or like in age of mechanical reproduction back in those days. Nietzsche criticized newspaper reading, and then Flaubert also hated newspaper reading. And I think there's a through line of like truth if you really want to encapsulate it, that's a long process that calls into question a lot of your previously held beliefs, but yet mass circulation or the so-called democratic enlightenment, it is a mass movement, and it sort of plays into our preferences to turn our minute opinions and perspectives into grand structures in our lives.
Yeah. No, I think that's right.
Mm,
Like democratic political philosophy is fundamentally a mass movement built
mm,
into the concept, and then the sort of mechanisms that fuel that are the things you mentioned and newspaper reading
mm,
and so on. Kierkegaard is relevant here as well,
mm,
in his critique of the public and public opinion, right? So in a culture that reads mass-produced thinking in the form of newspapers and so on, Kierkegaard thought it would basically create this kind of anonymous overlord that people would use as a kind of thought partner without thinking for themselves, and
uh-oh.
use it to criticize others who are trying to be individuals.
Yeah,
Uh,
now it's kinda our thought partners are literally turning into thought partners,
yeah,
AI chatbots, yeah.
yeah. So AI chat is
Mm.
even worse than this because it's trained on what's already been kind of produced, and then it's just reproducing that like at incredible speed.
Yeah, and I really like this analogy of the bow and arrow because I think the point that he's trying to make here is that not everyone should be involved in, like, tensing this arrow, but, like, the very tension is necessary for us to start thinking about this in the first place. If everyone were to go after truth, like, you know, this thing that he's writing about wouldn't exist. So, like, I think on a meta level, he's still talking about even the movement that he's claiming here. That's also in a dynamic tension still that cannot be definitively said. So even with this movement that he's using a bow and arrow analogy, that's in tension. So I feel like there's quite a lot of tension in the paragraph, starting with if truth, if we see truth as a woman, and then now like the through line here is maybe the existence, the, you know, the very motivation behind asking this question is birthed out of this tension. So,
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. That's how I'm reading
mm,
it. So let's
yeah, me too.
we're almost at the very end here. Let's
Mm,
wrap it up with this is a really key sentence at the end, and it actually ends
mm.
on a dash to which is pretty puzzling,
Yeah.
and inviting. So he says, "We who are neither Jesuits nor poor Jesuits, nor
Mm,
Democrats, nor even German enough, good Europeans." So he has this idea of the good European. That's really his audience in Beyond Good and Evil.
mm,
People who are this kind of new type of European that he wants to promote, these free spirits. We still feel it, the need of the spirit and the whole tension of its bow. And perhaps also the arrow, the task, and who knows, the goal. Dash. Dash.
oh my god.
Right. So Nietzsche is writing Beyond Good and Evil as a sort of educational program or vision for the future of the good European, i.e., this free spirited intellectual who embraces this tension in the bow because,
Mm,
like you were saying, Robin, they understand what it will make possible. It'll allow us
mm,
to aim at and to shoot at distant goals. And if we try to live a life of comfort or a life of democratic kind of equality in Nietzsche's sense, uh,
mm,
we will unwind the tension and not be able to produce for Nietzsche anything that can kind of elevate the human spirit, right? We will end up reading the newspaper.
yeah.
So let me bring it back to
The chat,
let me
yeah.
bring my face back. So
Mm.
I was away for a while.
No,
Um,
we're two little icons on near the bottom of the page.
yeah. Wow. I actually did not expect to get through it all, but
Yeah, we
Uh,
did. We're also, like, just on time.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, the preface is kind of challenging. People might buy the book, they're excited to read it. But, there was things in there that, we both had to kinda work through.
Mm.
But I think yeah, how do you feel about the preface after going through it?
I still need to reread it, and then I need to look up a bunch of references because in my head, it's just buzzing with, very much a you said that the book is written around the 19th century?
1886 it was published.
1886, 19th century. I feel like at the turn of that century, everyone's freaking out about mass media, one form or another, so hence this tension that everyone's feeling, so, like, is this mass movement towards whatever it was going on at the time in Europe a good idea? So there's this general skepticism, and I think this creates an opening where people accept that the tension is the point of doing philosophy. And a lot of the times, just to bring it back to a more practical point, I think I remember there was a note that you wrote on Substack and where you said, being uncomfortable with reading a preface by Nietzsche, for example, or a really challenging piece of literature is kind of the point of developing this ability to thinking shades of gray. You're not exactly going in there to find justification for your version of truth. You're not there to build a grand idea about what life is and then being able to kind of pawn it off, make money off of it, print newspapers out of it. But your job in there is to get comfortable with this, paradox here or a really difficult paragraph there. And through this training, can you even stand a chance to wind that bow enough to eventually reach or use your mental faculties to reach whatever goal that you set out for yourself?
Yeah, and this is really interesting when it comes to reading Nietzsche because there's
Mm,
multiple levels at which you will be uncomfortable.
mm,
First and foremost, just reading a primary source is
mm,
if it was written before, I don't know, the 60s or something,
mm,
is gonna be difficult, right? Reading Nietzsche's books, these are not highly edited, these are not like New York Times bestsellers, right? These are not books that are written for you to just kinda
not the let them theory.
yeah. Right, this is not Tony Robbins, right? These are books that are very personal, they're very messy, um, right? So just reading the actual text, like, you could read about Nietzsche online and get a sense of his
Mm,
big claims, right? But at some point, you need to sit with the discomfort to really understand him. And then there's the kind of challenging nature of the content of what he's saying, not just in
mm,
terms of, like, complex philosophical theory, but making you question your moral beliefs, making you read things
mm,
that, might turn your stomach a little bit, right? "Oh, am I allowed to read this guy? Is he's saying some weird stuff about women and
mm.
nationalism, right? Is he a Nazi? Is he a
Yeah.
misogynist?" Right, so, Nietzsche really forces you to, um, question yourself and how reductive your beliefs can become if you kinda let them be shaped by mass media for too long.
Mm,
So I think that's one of the great values of reading Nietzsche is he makes you aware of, um, how certain areas of thinking you've completely closed yourself off to because
mm.
they're scary or they're challenging or you're not sure if you're allowed to even think about them, right? So the book is Beyond Good and Evil. What does that mean? Beyond good and evil. I thought, like, why would we wanna go beyond good and evil? Good and evil is what grounds our whole civilization, right? Um,
Yeah.
so the title itself is challenging, like, what is he even talking about, and why should I want to know about that, right?
Mm,
But that is what it's all about at the end of the day, like, you can read a Wikipedia article, you could watch a video summarizing something, but sitting down and having a personal relationship to it so that you're able to also um, do what we're doing right now. I mean, this is like, for me, this is the good life. Like,
yeah.
I'm having a great time. I could do this for 5 hours.
Yeah.
But the way that you reach that point is by first challenging yourself, to develop a personal relationship to these texts, and you don't need a formal degree to do it. You don't need to be a genius. You don't need to be anything. Like, I used to not read any books. Like, I couldn't even read a novel in high school,
Mm,
right? That's how I started, but you just gotta keep going, honestly, and
yeah.
go slow, ask questions, look things up, right? And become curious about, why do so many people praise this? What do I need to do to kinda see what they're seeing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I find this book is so perfect for your kind of teaching, Paul, because I think a part of you or a part of your work is all about getting people to build their own micro philosophies. And I think one of the first steps in reading Nietzsche, for example, is to realize that, yeah, a lot of academic work around Nietzsche, if you read them, they also carry this kind of dogmatic, kind of like certainty. It's like, no, no, this is what he's saying, or all that is what the other person's saying. And I think being able to pull that apart and just say, hey, that's based on preferences of the academic journal that they're publishing in or their institutional needs and then how they're interpreting it based on their experiences is also an invitation for people to like, hey, you're not here to build an impressive thing. That's not what you're doing here. But to build something that allows you to live in that state of evaluating everything around you. And then I think that's really valuable, especially in this day and age.
I completely agree, but I will
Mm,
say, to
mm,
put a warning label,
mm,
there is a kind of downside, a dark side to this
mm,
life, and, that's a choice everyone has to make, is how far do you wanna go? Questioning what you have inherited,
mm,
questioning what the people around you are living by without questioning it, right? Do
mm,
you want to be, um, a singular individual who's outside of society, but has some kind of special perspective on truth? Do you want to be someone who reads this stuff because it's interesting and you wanna think about it, but, you live a pretty normal life? So, everyone has to decide for themselves, like, how far do you wanna go?
mm,
Nietzsche went to the extreme. He was living a very lonely, sick life, right? But
mm,
that's because he had not many other options. Like, he basically was very ill and chose to overcome that um, illness by living philosophically to the maximum,
mm,
and that's what did it for him. So everyone's in a different situation, um, but everyone can read and understand these works, right? That's really the key
mm,
thing. You just have to give it the proper attention and care that it requires, and we should not expect it to be easy.
mm,
Like, same with music, you should not expect to pick up, the piano and then go play,
mm.
Thelonious Monk or something. Like, you need
Yeah.
to work your way up.
Or Wagner.
Right. So you need to work
Yeah.
your way up to it, but, I think Nietzsche is a great place to start because he is readable, and it's easy to get through, but difficult to understand.
Mm.
So, that's part of why I'm teaching this text, because I think it is a good entry point. And if anyone is interested, next week I'm starting my 10-week close reading of Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil through Substack. So, just gonna give you a link to the website. You can sign up if you're interested. I'll post it in the chat. And Robin, is there anything you're working on that you would like people to know about before we wrap things up?
Yeah, I'm really excited about this next workshop that we're gonna host, which is also gonna be a free one, so anyone can join. I'm still working on backend stuff right now, so I will post a link to it very soon, where Paul will hop on my side of things, which is I run a newsletter called A Mug of Insights, and my whole thing is getting people to do exactly what Paul's doing, but from more of a literature and kind of rhetoric kind of angle. So kind of like all the stuff that you wish that you've learned from your high school English classes, I'm there to cover. And we just did a wonderful series on a newsletter. The last segment of that series is going to come out, I think, this coming Monday, called Plain English, where we take you through from grammar to how to turn the perfect phrase. Produce the perfect turn of phrase. and it's basically going to build on a lot of the stuff that we're taught horribly in an either in an English degree or high school English class. So I'm kind of like the acting substitute English teacher who's a little bit more chill than your severe kind of stickler that you used to have in your high school classes. So I'm really excited about that. But this coming workshop with Paul is basically going to be about Paul's strategy for reading complex texts. I have limited capabilities because my background is primarily in literature, but Paul, I'm really excited to combine our perspectives on taking your philosophical angle of reading really intimidating philosophy text and combining that with a more of a pragmatic how do you parse a text that I teach a lot on my YouTube channel and on my newsletter. And I think, yeah, I'm really excited to run that one.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah.
Reading philosophy is a whole world onto itself, as you could have
Mm,
from this today. One thing I just want to say quickly before we wrap is you don't need to know the whole history of philosophy to read these texts.
mhm.
There are strategies you can use when you get stuck on like references to Plato or things like that, where you can just put a pin in it and kind of move on. So, some things I'll discuss will help you with those sort of challenges. A lot of people think they have to, study 5 years of philosophy just to understand what someone's talking about. I think that really is the wrong approach. Like, you can just jump into these texts, see where you get stuck, make a choice about it and move on, right? And there's a lot of things like that which I'll share in Robin's workshop. When is the date of that again? Is it the 22nd or
So
something?
it's around the end of the month. So we're currently looking at, depending on your schedule, Paul, like 22nd to 28th. But I'll put out the announcement really soon after we sort something out, just through a chat later.
All right, yeah,
Yeah,
good. All right, well, we've went for an hour and 40 minutes, which I
we have,
felt
and
like
it's
30
currently
minutes.
it's almost 2 a.m. over here. So
Well, yeah, maybe it's time to get some sleep for you, and I should probably go outside and do some Nietzsche walking myself.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
Robin, thanks so much. I honestly had a great time. Thanks
Same here.
so much for joining and being vulnerable, like without having read it, just reacting and
Mm.
asking honest questions. Like that's exactly what I'm trying to promote here, and I hope we can do it again. Maybe you can pick the next one.
Sure. Yeah. I'll pick something interesting for us.
Great,
Yeah.
and
Thanks
yeah,
for
thanks.
having me today. Yeah, it's been amazing.
Yeah, my pleasure, and thank you so much to everyone who came. I mean, we have 123 viewers in here who stuck around and wrestled with Nietzsche's text for us. So, if this
Mm.
is something you really enjoyed or benefited from, I love doing this. I'm happy to do it more, and just let us know. Let us know what you need to help you read, whether it's philosophy or literature.
Mm.
So, on that note, I hope everyone enjoys the rest of your Saturday or I guess Sunday, wherever you're at in the world. Thanks for watching. Yeah.